Patients ask cardiologists this question all the time. Is it biologically worse to scream and release anger, or silently swallow it to keep the peace? Pop culture usually tells us that bottling up emotions is a guaranteed way to cause a heart attack. That implies that explosive venting is a healthy pressure release valve. The medical reality is that neither reaction will cause a sudden heart attack tomorrow. However, both strategies systematically dismantle your cardiovascular health over a decade. Looking at this medical checklist, we group human anger responses into two physical archetypes. On the left, the storm. On the right, the slow burn. The storm is highly visible. You see flushed skin, a tightened jaw, and a racing pulse that you can feel in your neck. The slow burn is creeping and invisible. The symptoms look entirely different: chronic fatigue, stubborn weight retention, and an underlying sense of exhaustion. To understand how to actually protect your heart, we have to look under the hood. The difference between these two reactions comes down to how your body processes two very different stress hormones. These two specific chemicals are adrenaline and cortisol. Your choice of anger style determines which of your biological systems pays the physical price. We'll start with the person creating the storm, the exploder. This is someone who reacts to frustrating triggers with immediate, intense verbal or physical outbursts. That immediate reaction is driven entirely by the sympathetic nervous system. When you explode, you send a direct signal to the sympathetic nervous system, forcing it into overdrive. Within seconds, your bloodstream floods with an adrenaline spike and massive noradrenaline release. The heart muscle contracts harder, and blood vessels rapidly constrict. Psychologically, this feels great. The exploder gets immediate emotional relief by simply letting the anger out. But that emotional relief comes with a heavy physical tax. The cardiovascular system is forced to endure a violent, acute spike in blood pressure. The exploder enjoys a passing emotional storm that clears quickly. However, this acute, repeated battering accelerates arterial stiffness, prematurely aging the vascular walls over time. On the other side, we have the suppressor. This person forces a polite smile, bites their tongue, and internalizes frustration entirely to avoid conflict. Silent anger relies on a different biological pathway, the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal, or HPA, axis. Going back to our comparison chart, internalizing frustration acts as a specific input that activates the HPA axis instead of the sympathetic nervous system. Rather than a sudden spike, the HPA axis initiates a slow, continuous release of cortisol into the bloodstream. Socially, this is a highly effective strategy. The suppressor successfully preserves external peace and avoids those immediate, uncomfortable adrenaline spikes. But the body still logs the stress. This continuous cortisol drip locks the suppressor's physiology into a state of chronic, unending metabolic stress. That persistent stress response drives a cascade of secondary effects: insulin resistance, hormonal imbalances, and sustained low-grade vascular inflammation. The suppressor avoids the explosive storm, but they ignite a hidden, slow-burning fire in their metabolic foundation. The heart physically absorbs all the stress that the mouth refuses to speak. This brings us back to our original question: which path is safer? The answer is neither. Both paths lead to primary hypertension. This quadrant chart illustrates the true medical solution. We have to navigate to a third way, a strategy that actively manages the feeling of anger without triggering either extreme biological stress response. The exploder's habit sits in the top right quadrant: high emotional expression, but dangerously high biological stress. The suppressor's habit sits in the bottom right quadrant: very low emotional expression, but equally high biological stress. The medical ideal is over here in the top left quadrant. This is the green zone. It represents high expression with low biological stress. To reach that green zone, the exploder and the suppressor need two entirely different protocols. For the exploder, the primary goal is physiological downregulation. That means actively lowering the heart rate before speaking. You walk away, practice deep breathing, or simply delay a heated conversation by 20 minutes to allow the adrenaline to clear from your bloodstream. The trade-off is clear. This protocol requires immense patience in the heat of the moment, but in exchange, it successfully protects your vascular lining from acute damage. For the suppressor, the goal is exactly the opposite: safe externalization.
You have to physically process the frustration, have honest discussions with trusted people, write in a journal, or do intense physical exercise specifically to burn off and halt the continuous cortisol drip. The suppressor's trade-off is accepting the discomfort of vulnerability or physical exertion. The reward is protecting your metabolic system from chronic inflammation. Modern cardiology integrates emotional regulation and stress management as core treatment pillars, alongside traditional prescriptions. So the final verdict is straightforward. Do not explode as you please, and do not suppress as you please. Learn the art of healthy expression, because regardless of which toxic path you choose, your heart is the organ paying the final bill.